A very good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us for our Budget 2020 webinar amidst the COVID-19 situation. The positive side of COVID-19 is that it is spreading certainly digital adoption, and we are very pleased that 460 of you could join us today for the webinar. Just a quick introduction and few housekeeping matters before we start. My name is Ajay and I'm the Deputy Head of Tax for KPMG Singapore, and I'm joined today by our guest speaker, Mr. Swan Teck Kin, Head of Research, Executive Director, Global Economics and Markets at United Overseas Bank, and two of my fellow tax partners, Pauline Koh and Tan Chi Wei. The way we plan to run the webinar today is that Teck Kin will first provide us with an economic perspective on the budget and the economic outlook going forward. Thereafter, Pauline will take over and talk through the short-term measures proposed in this year's budget in terms of COVID-19 and few other tax changes, followed by Chi Wei, who will cover the long-term measures proposed in this year's budget, like the transformation and support package of 8.3 billion proposed by the Finance Minister in this year's budget. You can type your questions anytime using your screen, and we will endeavor to answer as many of those questions as possible at the end in the Q&A segment. For today's webinar, you will also be awarded your 1.5 hours of CP credits for attending the webinar. I'll provide more details of this at the end of the webinar. So before I hand over to Teck Kin, I would like to take this opportunity to provide a quick summary of my take on this year's budget. As this year's budget is an expansionary budget in light of the COVID-19 and the weaker economic situation, what we notice is that the tax changes which gives benefits to taxpayers like corporate tax rebate, property tax rebate have been proposed, but changes which require companies and individuals to pay more taxes, like the much anticipated GST hike, has been postponed. This is certainly a good news for the taxpayers. Similarly, in difficult times, cash is more important, particularly for loss-making companies who may not benefit from tax rate concessions. Hence, cash grant schemes like Market Readiness Assistance Scheme have been significantly enhanced and new schemes have been introduced. This is a very prudent approach taken by the government this year. The next point, various existing tax incentive schemes have been enhanced, which is also a good news because Singapore has already cleared the peer review process for harmful tax practices under the BEPS program, and our tax incentive schemes have come out clear. Enjoying these schemes in Singapore generally do not put companies under any adverse tax audit situation in other countries. So this is a good opportunity for you to look at these schemes if you wish to apply, or extend the period if you are already enjoying the schemes, and discuss with the relevant authorities. Last but not least, it's been a trend in Singapore budget that tax changes are being overtaken by non-tax changes to support companies and workers with different schemes. We do see the same trend in this year's budget, and there are more non-tax changes in light of particularly COVID-19 situation. But these are also important changes and can add value to your organizations. Pauline and Chi Wei will talk more about that later. But before that, let me hand over to Teck Kin, and I'll come back again at the end for the Q&A segment. Teck Kin, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ajay. Good morning, everyone. My name is Teck Kin. I'm from UOB. I run the research team in UOB, and very pleased to be here, and thanks KPMG for the invitation to be here. My job is relatively simple today. I just talk about the budget especially the philosophy and also some of the key issues behind them, and then our KPMG experts, Pauline and Chi Wei, will talk about the more important things that we need to take note of how to make full use of all these incentives and also changes that the government is providing to Singapore businesses. Okay, so let me move forward. Only 3 items here today. On Singapore, what kind of budget it is. Ajay mentioned it's an expansionary budget. Yes, it is. And why is it expansionary? Of course, one of the key reasons is our COVID-19. I'll give you some update on the COVID-19 and how it is going to have impact on our economies in the region as well as for businesses. So we need to take note of that. And also, what are the finally, the budget also addresses some of the longer term issues that we are facing, and also opportunities actually. Okay, so about for the next 20 minutes, we'll talk about these key points here. This budget is quite bold, and also in terms of its stance, it's an expansionary stance. And what kind of, and the next point I would like to address is what sort of this COVID-19, the viral outbreak that we have right now, how it is affecting our economy, to what channels, to what transmission channels, and what are the first round and second round effects that we will be seeing, especially if this situation drags out. And finally, what are the longer term issues that we face? I'll just give you some pointers on our aging society in Singapore and also the productivity challenges plus other issues. Okay, let's jump quickly into the next, the first segment on our budget. Okay, if you look at our budget, I just want you, this is PDF. Sorry, you will not be able to see the, it's not a PowerPoint, but never mind, I will give you the answers. You can see that our budget revenue, our revenue collection in Singapore, there are 3 main areas, right? Our sources of revenue, there are 3 main areas. The first one, 23% share of our revenue of Singapore, 16% and then 15%. You can see on the left-hand side of the screen on your slide. All these, you complain about your COE, etc. is only a very small percentage, right? Vehicle quota premiums, your COEs, only 9% of revenue comes from there. Take a look at the road tax, motor vehicle taxes that you are paying. It's only about 3% share. And stamp duty, 4%. So the bulk of our revenue actually comes from 3 main sources. The number one, 23% is corporate income tax, right? Our corporate income tax is a big bulk. Second, 16% is the personal income tax. And the last one, the last question mark there on 15% is GST. Right, so all these 3 revenue sources, and the question, of course, for Singapore, the challenge for Singapore is your corporate income tax at top and also personal income tax is subject to a business cycle. Right, so that's one issue. That means when there's a down cycle like this year, we are going to see, possibly into next year, you're going to have a downward pressure on our revenue. But our expenses continue because of our infrastructure, our aging and all that. So how do we balance that in Singapore? One way to do it is, of course, through this GST, which is more stable source of revenue. Right, more stable source of revenue. And second thing about our corporate income tax and also personal income tax, the second problem that we have is worldwide, the trend is actually moving towards lower tax rate and not higher tax rate. If you look at what the US did last year, right, corporate income tax rate. And this year, I think Trump is talking about something about either income tax cut, things like that. So for Singapore, the pressure is actually for tax rate to go down. That means revenue will be under pressure. So how do we make up of that? And that's the reason why there's a planned GST increase, which is now postponed, right, is to supplement our revenue. Okay, so this is a situation that we have. And on the other side, accounting, you talk about your what do you call that? Your balance. Oh, I can see this. Okay, here, the answers are reviewed. The answers are reviewed on the screen. So I was right. Corporate income tax, personal income tax. So in accounting, you talk about your balance sheet, right? And also your revenue and expenses. On the other side is your expenditure for Singapore. Singapore government, you can see that there are 4 main areas of our expenses. Singapore government expenses. They'll go to you and I. What are the key main ones? The rest at the bottom, you can see that the top 4 on the screen, the top 4 areas are all double-digit billions. Right, all more than 10 billions. Home Affairs, all the police and all that security actually lower down. Even national development. The national development is only 5 billion. All your HDB and things like that, all the building, 5 billion. So what are the main areas of expenditure that we should take note? The number 4 is transport. Your MRT, your infrastructure is there. And the more important ones are actually now coming up. Okay, you have this item, about 13 billion budgeted for this year, up from 12 billion. This is our education. Where our education expenditure, building of schools, the teachers, employment of the teachers, and all the resources. And the other critical one, this is even more critical, is our healthcare. Take a look at the healthcare expenditure. Went from 11.5 billion last year, and budgeted for this year 13 billion. So it's a big increase. Of course, COVID-19 is one of the reasons. About 800 million being budgeted extra for this year. But other than that, our regular expenditure for healthcare and spending and also development expenditure also figure greatly into this. So this is where the money is going, and the last item is on defense, right? To protect the country, to protect the people, and the finance minister talked about this at the end of his, towards the end of his speech. Not just the physical defense, and also your data security and your cyber security as well, right? So there's a lot of expenditure going into all these areas that need to be funded. Right, need to be funded. All right. So for this year, of course, you will see that why expansionary. If you take a look at last year, the question mark. Last year, the budget deficit, overall deficit was about 1.7 billion, and this year is close to 12 billion. 11 billion. Beg your pardon. It's close to 11 billion. So that is how many times, right? 10 times larger than compared to almost 8 times larger than last year. One of the area, of course, is if you look at the screen, the total expenditure has gone up significantly. The other part that we will come to that a bit later is your special transfer. These are the amount that is given, top up your various skills future and also your passion card, $100, here and there and things like that. So these are special transfer. These special transfers are being funded, very unique to Singapore, being funded by the blue color, the light blue color on the other column, which is our net investment return contributions, NRIC. So you can see that our regular expenditure is being funded by our regular revenue, which is operating revenue, and then the special transfers actually being funded by your NRIC, which are the returns from our reserves. Without those, we would not have been able to fund all these goodies that we are seeing every year. All right, so this is a unique feature of Singapore budget. All right, so these are special. The next slide just to show you in response to COVID. In response to COVID, these are two packages. One is a 4 billion on the left-hand side of the screen of various support for companies and also employees. Right, for companies and employees, all your wage credit scheme, job support scheme, tax rebate, etc. So about 4 billion out of there to stabilize in response to COVID, and also to the on the right-hand side is more for so-called for everybody. All these are payments of various payments of cash payments for the population. Okay, so altogether, in response is about 5.6 billion out of that out of the budget for this year. So this is an extra bit that were not seen in the previous years, and that's the reason why. As a result, our budget deficit just increased significantly compared to last year that I showed you just now, close to 11 billion, mainly because of these COVID-19 packages. All right, so this basically a quick note on the budget and the details of the various items. I know accountants may like some numbers, we like some numbers, so that's for you on the page 12 for you to have a look. So this is my first bit on a bit of background on the budget. So second one, I want to go through our COVID-19. Right, so the budget was in response to COVID-19 and it's still ongoing, that COVID-19. So I want to have provide you with a sense of how this COVID-19 is developing. These numbers are as of yesterday, probably the day before as well. You can see that most of the bulk of the cases at the top of the screen, all the cases are actually from mainland China. But the red area outside mainland China, the cases are actually building up very fast. If you take a look, maybe 1 month ago in early 2020, most of the cases are in China. But now you can see that if you read the news, they are catching up very fast. Close to 80,000 cases for the globally. And if you compare to SARS, you can see that on the screen on page 15, the SARS is actually not as contagious in terms of numbers, way smaller SARS compared to COVID-19. COVID-19, if you start point from 0, after about 1 month, day 30, you can see that COVID-19 is already way above SARS numbers in terms of number of infections. And if you move forward now, it's day 39, 40, 41, it's already way above. Compared to SARS, global cases was only about 8,000 cases at that time. So we are dealing with different things and a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns in this case. Tapering in China, the cases are tapering, but how about other parts of the world outside China? We see cases in Korea approaching 1,000. Later I'll show you how the numbers can be quite scary. What has China done? China has been, I have to give credit to China government and its people for really taking the punishment on this one. If you take a look at some of the news clippings, 500 million people are actually locked down at home. Most of them locked down at home, restricted movements. And China built all these hospitals, 10 days, in 10 days, 2 hospitals to deal with cases. And about 30,000 medical personnel have moved to Wuhan, which is the epicenter of this, the bottom of the screen, all these medics arriving from different parts of China to deal with the outbreak in Wuhan itself and also in Hubei. How about other countries? You can take a look at this chart here. The number of cases have built up outside China very rapidly. And this is an old number from yesterday morning. In South Korea, take a look at South Korea, 760 cases. Well, 2 weeks ago, you know, your incubation period about 2 weeks ago, it's just about 27. Now it's in multiple. Japan as well, and Italy, and so many other places. We have, I think today, Spain, isolated about 1,000 people in hotels in Spain. Right, the Spanish government, 1,000 people. So potentially some issues are developing. So we don't know how long this is going to last. And the market sentiment and consumer confidence will be driven by the development. All right, the market sentiment, you can see last night, Dow and also the equity markets dropped significantly. And so second day already. And also consumer confidence. You go down to the malls, especially in the touristy areas in Orchard Road, it's pretty quiet. Okay, so these are the impact. Okay, these are the effects. How do we work? How do we look at this? If you take a look at the graphics on 18, this is actually done quite fascinating, right? All these graphics, later you'll see, is actually done by our intern sitting at the end of the table. Okay, so she just took our report, which is listed at the bottom. Our report is from there. You can see that there's a graphics. If the outbreak, this COVID-19 outbreak lasts for 6 months, just like SARS, there will be certain impact, which is about 0.5% point to 1.5% point from our baseline growth forecast. If the outbreak stretches beyond 6 months, I think that's anybody guess how the situation is going to pan out. So for now, we look at it as a 6 months situation, and then there's a hockey stick kind of rebounds at the end of the period. So how does this affect? How does it affect the economy? We look at it 3 channels. On the left-hand side, first is through services sector. The second, or the indirect effect, is actually through the manufacturing international trade, and then through investment flows. Right. So the first direct impact is the first round. First round, for instance, if you look at the screen on the right-hand side, we use our tourism revenue as a dependent, how dependent we are to tourism revenue. How exposed are we to the tourism revenue? And also, to what extent are we dependent on the mainland Chinese tourist share of revenue? Hong Kong is the most exposed. 64% is tourist revenue, tourism, actually came from mainland China. Thailand, 28% of its revenue, and so on and so forth. Singapore is about 15% of our revenue comes from mainland tourists. So that is where we estimate the impact. And the bottom of the screen, you can see that the Chinese tourist arrivals in all these various places. For instance, in Hong Kong, 51 million tourists from China mainland China visited Hong Kong in 2018. In Singapore, it's about 3.4 million, about 300,000 a month, right? About 300,000 a month. Can you imagine now there's a lockdown? We are talking about this number being zero or maybe in the low numbers for the month, right? The effect is very apparent. That's why you are seeing in Orchard Road and all those places, right? So that is the effect. So other countries, same thing. If you scale it against population, it's also very obvious. Hong Kong, 8 million population, you have 51 million from China. Singapore, you have close to 6 million population, 3 million comes from China. Indonesia, 2 million visitors from China, but the population is 300 million. So that's not a main issue. That's the reason why the number of cases are basically non-existent in Indonesia. But you can see that the effect on the economy is very significant. Okay, here is a lowdown on what kind of effect are we going to have. It's about 0.5 to 1.5% points for most of the economies on the screen, which means if you take a look at Hong Kong, we have not adjusted the forecast. The forecast for this year is still at 1.2, but we are going to adjust it. If you look at the impact, anywhere from 0.7 to 1.5% could easily push the economy into another negative year. Okay, so this is what is facing Hong Kong, another potential negative number. After 1.2 negative in 2019, 2020, potentially another negative year. And Singapore, another example. If you remember, right now our forecast is 0.5%. We adjust it down by about 1% point. If you remember, the official forecast is minus 0.5 to 1.5. That means the minus number is bracketed into the forecast. It's included into the forecast range. That means from here, 0.5 for Singapore, our forecast right now for Singapore is 0.5% growth this year. Potentially, we could be facing a similar situation as Hong Kong if the situation drags out further, the outbreak drags out more than 6 months or spreads far and wide. Okay, so there is a kind of downside risk that we should be mindful of when we do our own planning, our business planning and things like that. We have to be really prepared for the worst. Okay, other countries, Indonesia is very typical. Indonesia actually is the least affected among the group of on the screen. It's the least affected. 0.1, 0.2% point impact. So as a result, our ASEAN economies is actually quite well diversified in that sense. So some will be hit more badly, some not so much. So more or less a balance for the 10 countries in this region. So if your business is diversified enough to other countries, so that is the impact will be more diluted. If you are focused onto a particular economy, then that is a big damage if it's not handled properly, right? So it's always good to diversify your business, right? So our friends here, KPMG, will be able to help you to diversify your business, look for business opportunities in other countries. Okay, right. Last section. I have about 5 minutes left, so I'll talk about the last section. What are longer-term challenges? I've also bracket opportunities. Rather than looking at this as a just challenge, problem, there are a lot of opportunities in these challenges as well, and which is also addressed in our budget. If you look at it carefully, our budget addresses the challenges and also the opportunities. Okay, so what are the challenges? Of course, first we have all these big expenditure items. I show you on the screen, I mentioned earlier, but this one also another way to look at it. Take a look at the arrow items. If you take a look at the arrow items, the transfers, big transfers. So as long as our net investment return continue to come in, we will be able to handle that. But if you look at the defense and the education and the health, especially health, take a look at the health, the last arrow there on the screen. Latest budget for the operating expenditure is 12 billion. 10 years ago, the number was only 3 billion. Take a look. 10 years ago, the number was 3 billion. That means our healthcare demand has gone up significantly, which means for our healthcare providers, and the number is going to go up, and the healthcare providers here, and potentially medical equipment suppliers, medical supplies companies, there are quite a bit of opportunities for our companies in this space, right? Education, same. Defense, your data security, your cyber security providers, and also your data centers and things like that. There are a lot of space, a lot of opportunities for our companies or even for companies, not just our company, for companies to operate in Singapore. Right? The Singapore government has a means to make this kind of spending. Right? So there's opportunities here. Okay, so I won't go through this. And page 24. What are the key areas? One of the key areas is our aging society. Take a look at our aging society on the screen. At the top, you can see that just a comparison. The red one is ASEAN. In ASEAN, 2030, there are about 50% of the population in ASEAN, 10 countries, there is about 35 and below. Young population, 50%. How about Singapore? Singapore, of course, is at the bottom. Only 1/3 of our population is so-called young population. That means 2/3 is old population, right? Or getting old population, 2/3. And Thailand is actually the second worst. Just slightly better than Singapore, but not much better than Singapore. Okay, just slightly better. Thailand is actually the second worst in ASEAN. Is second worst in ASEAN. So, of course, then healthcare demand, whether you have the means to support the old population, for the aged, etc. So that's where the pressure comes in for our expenditure, and there's also where opportunities for companies as well in terms of provision of services, a demand for nurses, doctors, medical supplies, medical equipment, hospitals, and things like that. All right, one last point that I'm going to address before I hand over is digitalization. People talk about digitalization, talk about the artificial intelligence, machine learning, the need to do that. Why is it a need to do that? That's because of pressure on companies as well. Pressure on companies to improve efficiency, to improve bottom line. And digitalization is one of the means to improve companies' bottom line, companies' costs. Why? There's a study from IMF. I just show you to show you on the screen. There's a study by IMF that says that digitalization is highly correlated with total factor productivity. Okay, forget about this jargon. Just think about it as productivity. Total factor productivity was mentioned in Mr. Heng Swee Keat's budget this year, right? 2.8% or something like that. But the important point to note is that it will help productivity, not just for country at country level, but at the company level as well. So digitalization has positive impact on productivity. The correlation is 0.5, which is considered high. And how does it work? Is every 1% increase in digitalization will improve our GDP growth by 0.3% points. All right? Think of it as company, you invest in digitalization, it will improve your headline, your revenue top line growth. All right? So your profit. Okay? So that is what that's what it says here. So there's a need and there's a drive to improve digitalization, to incorporate more digitalization. And last point, I don't want to spend too much time, is this climate change, of course. Singapore government is spending loads of money to defend against this last challenge, one of the main challenges, which is climate change, rising sea level, and also the threat to water supplies and all other issues. So again, government is willing to spend money, and also that's where business opportunities are as well for companies who deal with this, and also for individuals who are looking for what can I do, right? What can I do in the next 10 years, 20 years? Where are the opportunities for companies and also for individuals? All right, so I will just stop here, and please stay safe and stay healthy and stay calm too for everybody. All right, okay, I'll pass my time to Pauline, who will take you through to the more interesting part for your companies. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Tekin, for the very insightful presentation on the macro view of the recent budget. A very good morning to one and all. I'm Pauline Koh, a tax partner with KPMG Singapore, and I will actually take you through the next segment for today's presentation. As what Ajay has mentioned, for my segment, I'll be primarily focusing on the key tax and non-tax changes arising from the COVID-19 support package, as well as some other key tax changes announced during budget. Okay, for the COVID-19 support package, I will actually run through the key changes in the following order: the broad-based measures for businesses, followed by the targeted measures for specific sectors, and last but not the least, broad-based measures for workers. Okay, the first item on broad-based measures for companies is actually the corporate income tax rebate. So for this, as announced, this rebate, which is computed based on gross tax payable after deducting any tax set-off, such as foreign tax credit, has actually been enhanced for YA 2020. So it is up from 20% in YA 2019 to 25%, with a corresponding increase in the cap of 10,000 in 2019 to 15,000 in YA 2020. Okay, at KPMG, we did a quick calculation, right, and we noted that the optimal chargeable income before partial tax exemption to utilize the full CIT rebate of 15,000 will actually approximate 455,000. Okay, this is just for reference, right, for companies who are actually looking into, group relief consideration, as well as considerations to perhaps defer any capital allowance claim, right? So it's a reference point, and definitely I think this rebate is something that is highly anticipated, by the market. And while we welcome the enhancement, we must say that this rebate, both in terms of the percentage as well as the quantum cap, however, pales in comparison, right, to the YAs prior to YA 2019. So, for example, in YA 2015, the corporate tax rebate is 30% with a cap of 30,000. Nonetheless, I think this is welcome, and it will only benefit, of course, tax-paying companies. Okay, I'll move on. Estimated chargeable income. Right, as announced, companies who are actually on GIRO and currently file their ECI on time, they will actually enjoy automatic, extension of their interest-free installment, right, by another additional 2 months. And you can see it in the table that is being summarized. Right, this will actually apply to companies that file their ECI from 19th February 2020 to 31st December 2020, or those who file before 19th February 2020 and have ongoing installment payments to be made in March 2020. Right, for the later companies, which are those that are already on installment plan, they can actually expect to receive the revised installment plan from IRAS by the 5th of March 2020. Right? Alternatively, you can actually view the revised installment plan at My Tax Portal from 5th March 2020. Okay, Enhanced Carryback Relief Scheme. Okay, as announced, under this enhanced scheme, businesses are allowed to carry back qualifying deductions for YA 2020 of up to 3 immediate preceding YAs, right, starting from YA 2017, followed by 2018 and 2019. And this is on a due claim basis. The cap actually remains at 100,000, and this is again subject to the substantial shareholding as well as the same business test. Right, as clarified by the IRAS, it mentioned that, for companies, they can actually elect to carry back estimated amount of the YA 2020 losses before the actual filing of the YA 2020 tax return. So for this particular measure, while it was actually announced as part of the COVID-19 support package, the pegging of the qualifying deductions to YA 2020, which relates to FY 2019, may not fully help affected sectors, as the impact of COVID-19 is more likely to be felt in FY 2020. Nonetheless, this will go a long way to help businesses, including sole proprietors as well as partnerships, right, that are in a loss position for FY 2019, right, as a result of the slowing economy arising from the US-China trade war. Okay, the next change, that will impact businesses in general will actually be the accelerated capital allowance claim, right? As announced, this particular scheme actually provides the option to accelerate the capital allowance claim on qualifying assets that are acquired in YA 2021. That is over 2 years rather than the 3 years. And for this option, once it is exercised, it is irrevocable. So in this slide, I've actually included, an example. So we assume that we actually, acquired a qualifying plant and machinery of, say, 1 million, right, in FY 2020. Okay, looking at the table, right, under the existing Section 19A claim, right, you can actually claim this qualifying expenditure over 3 year of assessment. right? And under the existing Section 19A, there is actually a deferment option, which means that, say for example, if you're a company that is loss-making, right, instead of making the claim in that particular YA, you actually have the option to defer the CA claim to a later YA. And in practice, this is something that is, pretty welcome, because it will actually avoid any so-called forfeiture of unutilized capital allowances should there be any substantial change in the shareholder or change in the business, right? However, for this particular option that is provided in YA 2021, once you exercise this option, you need to actually make the claim within YA 2021 and 2022, which means that there is no option to defer, right? And from what we can see, this will definitely, be welcome, right, by tax-paying companies with this front loading of the capital allowance claim. Okay, the next change that will impact most businesses will actually be this accelerated claim for renovation and refurbishment expenses, commonly known as Section 42 claim, right? Based on the existing rule, there is a cap of 300,000, right, for every relevant 3 consecutive YAs, right? And for this, so-called acceleration, it actually allows, the claim to be done within 1 YA. And when the option is exercised, again, it is irrevocable. Let me run through this using this example. Sorry. Okay, in this example, we will make an assumption that the 3 relevant consecutive YA is YA 2019 to YA 2021, right? And the R&R incurred, right, we assume it to be 90,000 in YA 2019, 180,000 in YA 2020, and 150,000 in YA 2021. Okay, applying the 300,000 cap over YA 2019 to 21, the R&R claim, right, for the 150,000 that is incurred in YA 2021 will be capped at 30,000, right? It is because of the 300,000 cap. Okay, based on existing 14Q rule, right, this 30,000 cap for YA 2021 will actually be claimed over 3 years in YA 2021 to YA 2023. But under this option, when it is being exercised to accelerate the R&R claim, this 30,000 will actually be accelerated and claimed in YA 2021. Do note that, for this particular illustration, we have not actually accounted, for the YA 2021 14Q claim for the R&R incurred in YA 2019 and 2020. Okay, so it's strictly only for the R&R claim incurred in YA 2021. Okay, I think so far I've covered, the tax measures that will impact companies. And now we'll be looking at this so-called non-tax measure, which is the enhanced SME working capital loan, right? And as announced by the minister, the maximum loan quantum has actually been doubled to 600,000, right? And the government's free share for this has actually been raised to 80% from the current 50% to 70%, right? And this will actually take effect from March 2020 for 1 year till March 2021. Okay, I've covered the broad-based measures, for businesses, and now I'll move on to targeted measures for specific sectors. Okay, as announced by the minister, and as what Teck Kim has mentioned, there are a lot of impact arising from COVID-19, and the government has also introduced all these measures targeted at specific sectors. Right, so specifically, I think for qualifying commercial properties, there are 2 key measures that have been announced, namely the property tax rebate for 1st January to 31st December 2020. Okay, and it ranges from 10% to 30% depending on the type of commercial property. And just a note that, for this rebate, it will not actually cover premises or part thereof that are used for residential, industrial, or agriculture purposes, as well as for offices. Okay, and for this rebate, the IRS has also announced that they will actually be sending out the rebate notices by 30th April 2020, and they will actually effect any refunds by 31st May 2020. Okay, again, back to commercial properties, there is also the announcement that there will be a half or 1 month rental waiver for NEA managed hawkers, as well as qualifying commercial tenants that are managed or owned by other government bodies. Okay, there are also various so-called support that has been announced that are specific to respective sectors, ranging from the Enhanced Adapt and Grow initiative, right, to support training, reskilling, upskilling of employees in affected sectors that are in the forefront, specifically in tourism, aviation, retail, and food services. And for the tourism sector enterprises, there is also a 1-year temporary bridging loan of up to 1 million with interest rate that is kept at 5%. For the aviation sector, there is a 112 million assistance package that is co-funded by the government, and all this includes things like rebates as well as lending credits. And for qualifying cruise ships, regional ferries, and passenger-carrying hovercrafts, there is a 50% concession that is granted on port dues, for the period 1st March to 31st August 2020. Okay, now I'll move on to the broad-based measures, for workers. So I think as a result of the COVID-19 outbreak, as well as the crisis that we are facing, the government has actually introduced, or enhanced, the existing wage support scheme. So actually granted an 8% cash grant on local employees' wages, right, for the period October to December 2019, that is subject to a wage cap of 3,600. And the good news for this is that the cash grant will actually be tax exempted. And also for the wage credit scheme, it has also been enhanced, right, with the government's co-funding ratio increased to 20% for 2019 and to 15% for 2020. The qualifying monthly gross wage ceiling has also been raised from the current 4,000 to 5,000. Okay, now I'll move on, right, to the other key tax changes that has been announced during the budget. Okay, first and foremost, like what Tekin has mentioned on the goods and services tax. So I think it is definitely welcomed, by the businesses as well as by, individuals, that there will be no GST hike in 2021. However, in line, with our long-term strategy, to switch over to indirect tax, the GST rate will be increased to 9% by 2025, as announced by the minister. To, however, cushion the 2% GST rate hike, the government has also announced a 6 billion assurance package, which includes cash payout as well as enhanced GST vouchers to eligible Singaporeans. The other key tax change or enhancement that has been announced will be the Global Traders Program. For this program, currently it accords a 5 or 10% concessionary tax rate on qualifying transactions. And this has actually been extended, to 31st December 2026 with some refinements as follows. Okay, the GDP Structured Commodity Financing Scheme will actually be subsumed under the Global Traders Program with effect from 19 February 2020. With this scheme lapsing, after 31st March 2021. Right, and for the 5% concessionary tax rate on income from qualifying LNG transactions, it will lapse after 31st March 2021. So further details on this program will actually be announced by the Enterprise Singapore by May 2020. For this scheme, in KPMG's view, I think it's actually welcome because trading companies that are planning to undertake structured commodity financing activities such as factoring, forfeiting, export receivable financing, etc., will no longer need to apply, right, for both the GTP as well as the GTP SCF scheme in order for both trading activities to be covered. So I think it is definitely something that is welcome because likely they will be expected to fulfill only one set of criteria, right, for this scheme to apply. Okay, for the Finance and Treasury Centre scheme, which currently accords an 8% concessionary tax rate on qualifying income derived by approved FTCs from qualifying activities or services. Again, this has also been extended, till 31st December 2026 with the following enhancement. Right. First and foremost, the list of qualifying sources of funds will be expanded to include funds raised via convertible debts that are issued on or after 19 February 2020. Also, the list of qualifying FTC activities will be expanded to include transacting or investing into private equity or venture capital funds that are not structured as companies. Okay, there are also fine-tunements that are made to the Insurance Incentive Scheme, which currently accords 10% concessionary tax rate on qualifying transactions. For this, it will be extended till 31st December 2025 with the following refinements. Insurance Business Development, in short IBD, and IBD captive insurance schemes will be streamlined to realign the tenure of all awards under the IBD umbrella scheme and to subsume insurers currently engaged in marine hull liability business under the IBD scheme. So for this scheme, the MAS is expected to provide further details by May 2020. As announced during the budget, there are also certain refinements that are made to the following claims with respect to capital grants. Right. So currently, I think for capital grants, from a practical standpoint, despite capital grants given by the government, in practice, companies are still continuing to make capital allowance claim on some of those capital expenditures that are funded by capital grants. But in the recent budget, it was made clear that on a go-forward basis, for capital grants that are approved on or after 1st January 2021, no tax deduction nor capital allowance claim will be allowed on portion of capital expenditure that are funded by capital grants from government or from state boards. The other refinement relates, to the streamlining of prescribed working life of qualifying plant and machinery, right, that is claimed under Section 19 and the 6th Schedule of the Income Tax Act. So this will actually be applicable for plant and machinery that are acquired in or after financial year 2022. And for those that are acquired prior to FY 2022, right, if the CA claim on the entire cost of the P&M was deferred, right, it will also be streamlined. Apart from the streamlining extension of some of those schemes that I have just gone through, there are also some extension, that has been announced. First and foremost is the Land Intensification Allowance Scheme. which has been extended till 31st December 2025. And this date actually refers to the last date a building or structure may be approved for the LIA claim. The other extension relates to the withholding tax exemption for non-resident mediators, and this withholding tax exemption will be extended till 31st March 2022. The third extension relates to the concessionary withholding tax rate for non-resident public entertainers, currently at 10%. This will be extended till 31st March 2022 and will lapse thereafter. And last but not the least, the withholding tax exemption for non-resident arbitrators. This has also been extended till 31st March 2022. Okay, having looked at the extensions, now we'll look at the withdrawals. Primarily, there are two. One is in connection with Section 14E for the tax deduction for R&D expenditure. This will lapse after 31st March 2020. However, for existing incentive recipients, they can continue to enjoy the incentive until the end of their so-called incentive award. And also for the angel investors tax deduction scheme, it will also lapse after 31st March. And similarly, for existing incentive recipients, they can continue to enjoy the tax deduction on qualifying investments made during the period of the approved angel investor status, subject to meeting the existing conditions. Okay, with that, I think I've come to the end of my part of the presentation, and I'll hand over the time to Chi Wei.
Thank you, Pauline. Good morning, everyone, and thank you again for joining our webinar this morning. My name is Chi Wei, and I will be taking you through the next part of the webinar. For the next segment, we will be covering the more longer-term measures announced during Budget 2020. We are pleased to inform that a number of the measures announced are in line with KPMG's budget proposal recommendations. The overall theme of KPMG's Budget 2020 proposal was to position Singapore as the transformation capital of Asia by focusing on the three pillars of transforming enterprises, leading digital transformation, and establishing a sustainability hub. Singapore will not only benefit from seeing businesses transform for growth, but position itself as a jurisdiction to export these capabilities to other countries in the region. We will cover select Budget 2020 changes under the three pillars of transforming enterprises, digitalization, and sustainability. Budget 2020 has announced that Enterprise Singapore in FY 2020 will expand its support to up to 3,000 enterprises in their transformation journey using the Enterprise Development Grant, or EDG in short. The EDG will give SMEs up to 70% funding support in three areas. Firstly, core capabilities such as business strategy development and strategic brand and marketing development. Secondly, innovation and productivity such as automation, process redesign, and product development. Thirdly, market access such as overseas market presence, pilot project and test bidding, and standards adoption. The coverage of the EDG under these three areas span a wide spectrum of business needs, and enterprises seeking to transform should leverage on the high level of support given. The Enterprise Leadership for Transformation Program, or ELT in short, has been introduced as a 3-year pilot program to support business leaders of promising SMEs achieve their next phase of growth. The program seeks to offer structured modular training in business growth capabilities, for example, using frameworks and case studies to simulate and address actual business problems. It would also leverage on advisors and industry practitioners who will advise or guide these business leaders in the development of business growth plans. The program will also give access to alumni and networking forums that will bring about peer learning and collaboration. And lastly, it would also provide support for business plan implementation tailored to the enterprise's specific needs. For business leaders who do not know where or how to start the journey of transformation to bring about growth, the ELT will provide personal coaching and guidance. And regardless of the company's stage of growth, business leaders can tap on this program to gain knowledge and jumpstart their transformation journey. The Productivity Solutions Grant, or PSG in short, supports companies keen on adopting IT solutions and equipment to enhance business processes. It provides 70% funding support for certain sector-specific solutions, such as in the areas of customer management, data analytics, financial management, and inventory tracking. The sectors include retail, food, logistics, precision engineering, construction, and landscaping. Budget 2020 has announced that the PSG will be enhanced to offer a more comprehensive suite of pre-approved IT solutions and equipment. The scope will also be expanded to include consultancy services such as job redesign. The number of sector-specific solutions will also be increased. The Skills Future movement was introduced in 2015 to provide people with opportunities to develop to their fullest potential throughout life. Budget 2020 introduces a number of new packages and enhancements to the existing schemes. Apart from the Skills Future credit support packages, which would target the individuals or employees directly, which we are not covering as part of our webinar, those would actually apply across the lifespan of the individual or employee's career. We are focusing on this slide. The new Skills Future Enterprise Credit Scheme that will focus on encouraging employers to begin their workforce transformation. Eligible employers will receive a once-off 10,000 credit to defray up to 90% expenses for supportable enterprise capability development as well as workforce transformation programs. 3,000 out of the 10,000 has been set aside for workforce transformation programs. This is to encourage employers to undertake workforce transformation to reskill or upskill their employees. Employees upskilling is crucial as Singapore takes further steps to help businesses thrive in a growing digital economy. The Skills Future Enterprise Credit Scheme will not only help businesses defray costs of training for such upskilling, but also retain the talent pool to enable deepened enterprise capabilities. The Market Readiness Assistance, or MRA, which Ajay alluded to earlier, the grant scheme was introduced in 2013 to provide support to companies taking their first steps to go overseas. It provides 70% funding support for companies seeking to go overseas, such as overseas market entry studies, business matching, participation in overseas trade fairs, etc. The scope of the MRA will be expanded to include free trade agreement consultancy services to support SMEs to better leverage on FTAs, as well as to in-market business development activities. The grant cap has also been increased from 20,000 to 100,000 per new market per company from financial year 2020 to financial year 2022. The larger MRA grant cap is welcome as taking businesses overseas requires significant costs, and the previous cap of 20,000 has been regarded as insufficient. There should, however, be flexibility on how new market is to be defined or interpreted. For example, Shanghai might be considered a different market from Beijing, given the different market attributes arising from different taste or buying preferences. The double tax deduction for internationalization, or DTDI in short, provides for 200% tax deduction for qualifying expenditure of up to 150,000 on 4 specified activities, namely overseas business development trips, overseas investment study trips, participation in overseas trade fairs, and participation in approved local trade fairs. With effect from 1st April 2020, the DTDI scheme has been enhanced to include third-party consultancy costs for new overseas business development, such as to identify suitable talent and to build up business network, and new categories of overseas business mission costs, such as fees incurred on speaking spots to pitch products or services at overseas business and trade conferences, as well as third-party consultancy costs to arrange business networking events to promote products and services. More information will be provided by Enterprise Singapore by end March 2020. The scheme has been extended to 31st December 2025. The M&A scheme was introduced in 2010 to enable companies to grow via strategic M&A acquisitions. The M&A schemes provide for the following tax benefits. First, M&A allowance over 5 years based on 25% of value of qualifying acquisition subject to a cap. Secondly, stamp duty relief capped at 80,000 per financial year. And thirdly, a 200% tax deduction on transaction costs subject to a cap of 100K per YA. The M&A scheme has been extended to 31st December 2025. There are 2 changes to the scheme. First, the stamp duty relief will lapse on or after 1st April 2020. And secondly, no waiver will be granted for the condition that the acquiring company must be held by an ultimate holding company that is incorporated in or tax resident in Singapore. The extension of the scheme is to continue to provide companies to grow by way of strategic M&A acquisitions. The fact that no waivers will be given for the condition that the acquiring company must be held by an ultimate holding company that is incorporated in or tax resident in Singapore would mean that MNCs with headquarters in Singapore will no longer be able to tap on this scheme on a going forward basis. MOF has also clarified that this is to ensure that the scheme will then be more targeted for SMEs that are seeking to grow by M&A activities. We will now move on to talk about some announcements relating to taking digitalization forward. Three initiatives are shown in this slide. The SME's Go Digital program was introduced in 2017 to help SMEs build digital capabilities. It has been expanded to drive greater adoption of digital technology. Specifically, it will develop more industry digital plans or IDPs or their equivalent and pre-approve more digital solutions that will cover all 23 industry transformation map sectors, up from the current 10. The PSG, as mentioned in an earlier slide, will be enhanced to offer a wider range of IT solutions. And thirdly, a new initiative, Grow Digital, has been introduced to enable SMEs to access global markets via B2B and B2C digital channels. Under this new initiative, the IMDA and Enterprise Singapore will co-fund 70% for multi-channel e-commerce platform solution packages that will equip SMEs to reach out to new markets and new customers on multiple overseas e-marketplaces. The introduction of the Grow Digital initiative is timely, as it aims to help SMEs quickly scale up in the fast-growing digital economy. By leveraging on established online distribution platforms, SMEs will be able to develop multi-channel or omni-channel B2B or B2C networks to reach out to a wider market in a much faster way. They will also not be burdened with having to develop their own platforms and channels. Speed and ability to utilize built-in capabilities such as advanced data analytics and AI in such platforms will lead to increased revenue growth for the companies. And having access to multi-channel online platforms also help increase brand loyalty, as customers are better served by seamless customer usability and connectivity. Under Section 19D of the Income Tax Act, writing down allowance is granted for qualifying expenditure on the acquisition of an indefeasible right to use international submarine cable system. The scheme has been extended for another 5 years to 31st December 2025. Connectivity is key to Singapore's transformation as a global Asian node of technology. Keeping in mind the progressive rollout of the 5G network by telcos in the next 2 years, the ability to claim tax depreciation on significant capital expenditure will be pivotal to maintain and improve competitiveness. We will now move on to talk briefly about sustainability in light of climate change considerations. Tekin mentioned that earlier in his presentation. To support international efforts to combat climate change, Singapore will do its part as a responsible member of the international community to build a sustainable future Singapore. It is committing close to 1 billion for research in urban solutions and sustainability. The research will focus on a host of environmental solutions, including circular economy models to manage waste, research on renewable energy alternatives, cooling measures, and carbon capture, among others. To address the existential threat of rising sea levels, there will be an initial injection of 5 billion for a coastal and flood protection fund. We will also phase out internal combustion engine vehicles by 2040. This will progressively bring about cleaner vehicles and move towards a mobility future through enhanced public charging infrastructure and incentives to encourage more pervasive adoption. There will also be a review of the vehicular tax structure. Last but not least, all HDB towns will be eco-friendly come 2030. The HDB Green Towns program and incentives to lower-income households to purchase energy-efficient appliances will help to build a conducive, eco-friendly environment. The 5 billion Coastal and Flood Protection Fund, which I mentioned earlier, will encourage a suite of new climate change players to look into effective or innovative solutions to kickstart the climate adaptation and mitigation ecosystem in Singapore. This will certainly position Singapore as a model for climate risk mitigation for for other coastal cities and countries to follow. We will now consider some sector-specific tax changes that will protect and grow the tax competitiveness of Singapore. The Section 13Z Safe Harbour Rule was introduced to provide upfront certainty on non-taxation of gains on disposal of ordinary shares of companies if the divesting company holds a minimum shareholding of 20% in the company whose shares are being disposed for a minimum period of 24 months prior to its disposal. Currently, the Safe Harbour Rule does not apply to gains from disposal of unlisted shares in an investee company that is in the business of trading or holding Singapore immovable properties other than the business of property development. As announced in Budget 2020, from 1st June 2022, the scheme will exclude disposals of unlisted shares in an investee company that is in the business of trading, holding, or developing immovable properties in Singapore or abroad. The tax treatment of gains from such disposals will be assessed based on the facts and circumstances of the case. The scheme will be extended to 31st December 2027, with more information to be provided by IRAS come end June 2020. While the extension of the Safe Harbour Rule to 31st December 2027 is a welcome change, the expansion of the exclusion has come as a surprise, although it was mentioned that this is to ensure consistency in the tax treatment for property-related businesses. So unless specific exemption applies, Singapore companies will no longer enjoy certainty on gains relating to the disposal of shares in a company that invests in offshore real estate. Real estate investors should therefore revisit their investment structures and exit strategy in view of this change. It is not clear at this stage whether grandfathering rules will be provided for existing structures, and the lack of certainty may then encourage investors with investments in offshore real estate to consider applying for Singapore fund exemption schemes. Currently, withholding tax exemption applies to interest payments made on margin deposits by members of approved exchanges to non-resident persons on certain covered products. The scope of covered entities under this exemption has now been extended to include the following: members of approved clearing houses, approved exchanges, and approved clearing houses. The scope of covered products has also been liberalized to include all other derivative contracts traded or cleared on approved exchanges and approved clearing houses. The enhancements will apply to agreements entered into on or after 19 February 2020. MAS will provide further details by May 2020, and they will also review the extension of this exemption by 31st December 2020. The enhancements of the withholding tax exemptions regime will further liberalize the financial services sector, as derivatives are risk management products which are important and attractive in times of volatility and financial and commodity markets. Like times like this in the COVID-19 situation, it is timely that the extension of this scheme to such products has been granted, and it will certainly further enhance Singapore's position as a global financial center. Section 13H venture capital funds currently enjoy tax exemption on income from qualifying investments. Budget 2020 has expanded the list of qualifying income and investments to include relevant items which enjoy tax exemption under other fund tax incentives schemes, such as those under Sections 13R, 13X, and 13CA of the Singapore Income Tax Act. Section 13H funds will also enjoy GST remission at a fixed recovery rate to claim GST incurred on their business expenses. This is again similar to Sections 13R and 13X fund tax incentive schemes. 13H funds can also now be constituted as foreign incorporated companies or Singapore Variable Capital Companies, or VCC in short. On fund management, fund managers managing Section 13H funds currently enjoy a 5% concessionary tax rate on management fees and performance bonuses for up to 10 years. Going forward, the incentive tenor has been set at 5 years and can be renewed subject to conditions. The Section 13H fund tax exemption and fund management incentive will be extended till 31st December 2025. The changes are a step in the right direction towards promoting Singapore as a regional fund hub for startups and aspiring entrepreneurs. With the proposed expansion of the list of exempt income, this brings about tax certainty and addresses industry concerns about the restrictive nature of the exempt income list for 13H funds presently. The GST remission also helps in improving the cash flow position. While there are some enhancements to the incentives which are welcome, it remains to be seen if these enhancements will help, as other existing conditions should be relaxed further. For example, there are still restrictive qualifying conditions such as the prescribed level of investment in Singapore startups. Without a relaxation, it is unsure if the enhanced 13H fund scheme is going to be a game changer for the venture capital fund community. This is likely to only benefit existing funds and those managed by fund managers approved under the Global Investor Program, rather than attracting venture capital funds in general. Lastly, Budget 2020 offers some enhancements to the existing MSI schemes as follows. Withholding tax exemption will be extended for qualifying payments made on qualifying financing arrangements entered into or before 31st December 2026. And under the MSI AIS award, in-house ship management income derived on or after 19 February 2020 by a MSI AIS sister company and a MSI AIS local subsidiary will enjoy tax exemption. For the MSI SRS award, income derived on or after 19 February 2020 from operating a provisionally Singapore registered ship will now qualify for tax exemption. Where permanent certificate of registration is not obtained, tax exemption is allowed up to 1 year from the date of issue of the provisional certificate. Stamp duty remission will lapse for instruments executed on or after 1st June 2021. The MSI schemes will be extended till 31st December 2026, and the MPA will provide further details by May 2020. In line with the overall theme of Budget 2020 to transform and grow Singapore's economy and enterprises, it is important to improve our market position in the wake of increasing competition from global economies. The move to extend and enhance the MSI schemes is pivotal to deepening and strengthening Singapore's competitiveness as an international maritime hub. This will tap on the increasing trade volumes in one of the fastest growing regions in the world. With this, I end my segment of the presentation, and I'll now hand the time over back to RJ.
Thank you, Chive. Thank you, Pauline and Tekin, for providing your insights. We have now come to the last segment of the webinar today, which is the most favorite, I presume, amongst all of you, because we have received a lot of questions. As I mentioned earlier, we will probably not be able to answer all of the questions, but we do have all the details, so we will certainly revert to you if we are not able to answer your questions. So let me jump straight into it and facilitate the questions that all of you have raised. My first question, I will refer it to Tekin. There is a question here for you, Tekin, which says, what other measures could the government have introduced to alleviate more immediate cash flow issues for the businesses? Certainly, it's a very pertinent question because a lot of businesses are worried about their cash flow as well. So,
yeah,
Tekin.
Exactly. I think right now, with the business volume, you can see that especially on the tourism-related, the 5 sectors, some of these are retail operations and tourism-related sectors, businesses are down by, what, 70, 50%, 60%, 70% even. So immediate cash flows pressures are there. So right now, at this point, I think the government is cognizant of that because I had the opportunity to sit through a lunch session with Mr. Heng Swee Keat this past Monday. So I think the government is cognizant of that, but because of the uncertainty of this situation, how it's going to pan out, is it going to be faster than expected or slower than expected, etc. So, but of course there are other toolkits that are in the toolbox. I think some of these are measures that the government could deploy. I think could include, for instance, taking measures such as deferring collection of taxes and levies that are due in the near term, such as corporate taxes and also property taxes for business, and perhaps personal tax as well, I hope, and to alleviate. But you know that tax has to be paid, but the deferment I think would be welcome in this situation of immediate impact.
Thank you, Tekin. I certainly wouldn't mind paying my taxes later. Next question is for Pauline. In fact, there are a few questions on the job support scheme and the wage credit scheme. So let me pose those questions to you, Pauline. The first one is, are the grants available to all employees or only Singaporean employees?
Okay, for the job support scheme, right, it is actually a temporary scheme, right, to help enterprises retain local employees. So local, they're actually referring to Singapore citizens or Singapore PRs.
However, the wage credit scheme seems to be restricted to only Singapore citizen employees, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And the next follow-on question is, how do you apply for these schemes? How do companies apply for these schemes?
Actually, there is no need for them to apply because the government will actually be basing on the CPF contribution data, and then they will actually calculate it, and IRAS is expected to effect the payment by 31st July this year.
Okay. And are these grants going to be taxable in the hands of the companies?
It will be tax exempt in the hands of the employers. On the other hand, for the wage credit scheme, it is actually considered a revenue grant and it will be taxable in the hands of the employers.
Okay. So job support scheme is not taxable, but the wage credit scheme is.
That's right.
Okay. There's another question from your segment. The question reads that the lessees and can you please elaborate on the streamlining of the working life for plant and machinery for capital allowances claim?
Okay, sure. I think you're referring to the 19, the streamlining of the prescribed work life, for plant and machinery under Section 19 and 6 schedule. So basically the streamlining is actually to streamline in cases whereby the current prescribed working life of the plant and machinery is 12 years or less. Going forward, they can claim the capital allowance over 6 or 12 years. And for those with current prescribed working life of 16 years, they can claim the annual allowance over 6, 12, or 16 years. So I think in practice, actually, Section 19 claim is not, so commonly used because I think most of us would go for the accelerated claim over 3 years.
So instead of 3 years now, there is further acceleration to claim it over a period of 2 years.
This is actually the streamlining of
Okay.
Section 19 claim.
So let me move on to Chiwe's segment. There are some questions from that segment as well, Chiwe. You also talked about a number of cash grants for businesses. Now, particularly for the Market Readiness Assistance Grant, you talked about it is applicable only to SMEs. So the question here is, what is the definition of SME, small and medium enterprise?
Yes, SME is defined as a business entity that's registered in Singapore, has at least 30% shareholding, and group annual turnover not exceeding 100 million, or group employment not exceeding 200 employees.
Okay, and how do enterprises again apply for these grants?
Well, there are a number of grants that are actually administered by various agencies. The key grants are the Enterprise Development Grant that I mentioned during my presentation, the Market Readiness Grant as well. Those are administered by Enterprise Singapore. The Go Digital Scheme, which is a new initiative introduced this year, are administered by IMDA.
Okay, there is another next follow-on question, very topical question, as a lot of companies are upgrading their ERP systems. The question here is, do the grants apply to expenses incurred for the upgradation of these ERP systems?
That's a good question. The upgrading of ERP systems could potentially be supported under the Enterprise Development Grant. This would have to be applied for through Enterprise Singapore, and certainly KPMG can assist with the application of such grants.
Thank you, Chiwe. I wish we could continue this discussion and answer more questions. Unfortunately, we are limited by the time we have in our hand. But thank you so much for sending your questions through. And as I mentioned earlier, we will certainly revert on those questions that we could not address in the webinar today, and we will come back to you on an individual basis. Now, there are some closing matters that I would like to just touch upon because some of you have asked questions around these areas as well. So first and foremost, after this webinar, there is a link for you to provide your feedback to us. So we will certainly appreciate if you can spend few minutes to just provide your feedback about the webinar and send it back to us. And in terms of the content, so a follow-up email will be sent to you with the links to download the 3 things as mentioned on the slide, which is the today's webcast link. So some of you could not probably hear the webcast in the beginning or would like to share with the colleagues. So the link for the webcast will be available as well as the slides for your reference. And more importantly, the certificate of participation will be also sent by email to you for you to claim your 1.5 hours of CP credit. So these things will be provided via a link, and you let us know about your feedback. We thank you once again for joining us and look forward to receiving your feedback as well as speaking with you in our future webinars. Thank you so much and have a safe and healthy week ahead. Thank you.